You guys have already seen bits and pieces of the shop. Today, we're going to take a look at the print farm, and I'm going to share with you what I did and why I did it. So the print farm is in a room in the basement in my house. So let's go take a look here. And you can see right away, one of the things you'll notice is that this is one of those situations where it's definitely function over form. The room here is not finished. It probably never will be, and that's okay with me. This room was initially intended to be a home theater. It was never built out, but that sets us up really well for a print farm. It has 10-foot ceilings. That gives me enough room to put 3 racks high, so I can have 3 printers high. Awesome. It has a dedicated 100 amp sun panel in that room. You saw probably just as I was walking in the door. So this room right here has a little bit of equipment in there that probably uses, just a couple amps, but there's a 100 amp service right there just for this room. So that gives me enough power to run quite a few printers. There is a dedicated heating and cooling zone here, so I can control independently this room from the rest of the house. So the rest of the house could be heating and this room could be cooling, or vice versa. It allows me to control the temperature completely separately and vent the heat that builds up in here out if that ever becomes a problem, or to push the air in here out if it becomes an air quality problem. I don't really expect either of those to be an issue. I haven't seen any problems with air quality to this point, and the heat is really, at this point, at least with 12 printers, just not an issue. Being in the basement like this room moderates the temperature very, very well. The first thing I did as I was moving out of the office was to install some racks. Fortunately, a friend of mine had some of these racks built, at least the parts for them. I believe they came from Costco or something like that. They were torn out of a store. They came with most of what I needed to make this work. They came with the uprights and they came with the crossbars. They did not come with anything that ran front to back. So that turned out to be a blessing, because normally those things are about 18 to 24 inches deep. I decided to basically cut these uprights, or some of these uprights, down to 30-inch chunks, and that gave me 30-inch deep shelves, which is awesome. So they're more like countertops than they are shelves, which is really great. It gives me a ton of room to do maintenance in front of and behind, to easy access all the way around the printer. So really happy with that. I did put some melamine on top. I like the smooth surface, that kind of plasticky smooth surface of the melamine. And it's really easy to clean up, and again, it doesn't have to look fancy in here, but that's one thing that looks a little bit fancier, I guess. But it's being 7 feet high, these racks give me the ability to have 3 levels of shelving for 3 levels of printers if I ever had to go that route. Right now I've got 12 printers running, and I've got enough racking in this front 60% of the room to handle 16 on this easily accessible shelf. If I want to, I can scale up to 48 just in this front half, and I've got plenty of power to be able to handle that. And then if it goes even bigger than that someday, I don't know if that will ever happen, but if it does, I can put another 30 or so printers in the back, 40, and just have to kick the wife out of that. No more storage back there if it comes to that. But yeah, racks, critical part. Now, a couple things I want to highlight that maybe you might have heard other people talk about if you're looking at other people's videos. First, I anchored these things to the wall. I didn't want them to rack, tilt sideways or forward and back. So at the top and the bottom, I just put a lag essentially into the stud to hold it so it can't rack. And as a result, they're quite stable. They're all mounted together and to the wall. And when these printers are running, I can feel a tiny bit of vibration, because these printers are, fast and they're moving quite a bit. But I don't see any need whatsoever to put weights like pavers or anything else underneath these printers, or to try to isolate them from each other with, by creating 2 sections of melamine or weather stripping the underside of the melamine. I've seen other people do all sorts of things to try to isolate the vibration from printer to printer so they don't resonate. My printers aren't all printing the same thing at the same time. They start at different times. They're printing different products. There's no real concern of resonation. And also, there's no real vibration. I mean, there's a tiny amount of vibration. It's not enough to affect a print. You can you can barely feel it. You know, it's hardly a thing. So I'm just not concerned with that at all. I'm not doing anything to them other than secure them to the wall, make them rock solid steady, and I'm good to go with the racks. You probably noticed I standardize on the bamboo printers. I have right now 2 X1 carbons. This is actually the very first filament printer I had. I was printing with resin for years before I switched over to filament. So 2 of these. I print mostly carbon fiber materials on these printers, although I do a little bit of basic PETG as well. And everything else, which is, you know, a couple varieties of PLA and PETG, I print on all of the P1Ss. So I basically have made the decision to standardize on bamboo and the enclosed printers, but not to spend the money to go straight to the carbons for everything, because I really don't need that across the fleet. It's just more money for not a lot of value when I'm not planning to use that functionality. Now, you'll also notice I did put the AMSs on all of my printers to this point. And, you know, I really would like to get to 3 kilogram spools or something along those lines at some point. But right now, the bulk pricing on bamboo filament, which I've been very happy with to this point, is quite a bit better than what I can get at the volume that I buy at from other places that sell in bulk on larger spools. So maybe I'll get there at some point. I hope that's the case, but and I'd really like to. I'd like to at least do it a little bit to just try it out. But right now, I'm not big enough to be able to make that work financially. So the AMSs, they really do a couple things for me, maybe 3 things. First, I have these 2 set up to do multiple filament types because I have a couple products that use multiple colors for labeling and things like that. So I print multicolor setups here. And then I also have all of the other P1Ss, and actually even the X1 carbons. I have them set up each with 2 different types of filament so that I don't have to dedicate a single printer to a particular filament type, and I can quickly change to print, you know, PLA or PETG or you know, whatever the 2 I have loaded are, without having to come down, unload filament, reload filament, and go through that hassle. So that's the second thing that I have the AMSs doing for me. And third, and a slight compromise, you know, trying to get me to that 3 kilogram benefit of not having to reload spools all the time, it automatically switches over from, you know, one PETG spool to the other PETG spool, for example. So I can print overnight without having to worry about running out of filament, or I can print during the day without having to check on it constantly and worry about running out of filament all the time. So I'm stuck with the AMSs, I think, now. I mean, they're really not that, I'm stuck with them. I really like the AMSs, but I do wish I could print on larger spools. One more thing to mention about standardizing in the print farm, and for me, that's on these bamboo printers, is just maintenance. Now, I've been pretty fortunate so far. I haven't had maintenance problems on any of the printers except this one. It's been a problem in a few different ways. It had a bad filament sensor. It had a bad micro LiDAR camera. It had a problem with cooling. I've managed to work through all those. Bamboo's been a little bit slow, to be honest, but pretty good in their support. If they were just faster, they'd be awesome. But this is the only one that's had any problems. Every other printer has been error-free, problem-free, and maybe I should cross my fingers or knock on wood or something, but I've been really fortunate so far. But having 2 different types of printers, even though they're both bamboo printers, I do end up having to stock some different parts for both printers because they don't use the same print heads, for example. There's a couple differences in the parts there. A lot of the enclosure is basically the same thing. The AMS is the same thing, but some of the parts are different, and that's the thing to think about. For me, having 2 types of printers from the same manufacturer with mostly the same parts is easy. I'd rather do that than spend the extra money to make all the P1Ss, X1 carbons, and save that money and invest it into something else. So you already know I'm printing PETG, PLA, PETG CF as the primary filaments almost exclusively down here, and those are all really safe to print. They don't create volatile organic compounds or VOX in the air. It's not dangerous to breathe. And I actually have an air quality monitor. I normally keep it in the shop. I brought it into here, and the air is fine. I don't have problems with Vox, formaldehyde, with particulate or any other thing. So I'm not investing in an air quality filter because it's not necessary. I'd rather save that money and spend it on another printer or buy some more filament, do something else that actually drives the business forward rather than just spend it on cool toys. And I could, get one, link it to you guys down in the description, try to make some filament money on it, but I don't want to do that for things I don't believe in and I'm not going to stand behind. So if you're printing the same kind of materials I am, you don't need it. And I'm not going to suggest it to you. Now let's talk about power. Like I mentioned, I've got a 100 amp sump panel right in the room behind me. It powers a little bit of equipment in that room. It uses less than 5 amps total. And that leaves me about 75 amps before I hit that 80% threshold where the breaker would potentially trip. So the circuits that we're running in this room are, for the most part, at least the ones I'm using so far, are 20 amp circuits. I can put 80% load on those and run at about 16 amps before I have a problem. At this point, I've got no more than 6 printers on a single circuit, and I've been monitoring the power utilization on those, the draw. And I've got an amp meter just plugged into it. There's a little app that shows me the trend over time. And the max that I've seen on these 6 printers, even when I start print immediately, one after the other, as fast as I can do it manually, the most I've seen them draw on that circuit is 9 amps. So 6 printers at 9 amps, knowing that I have a 16 amp max threshold, I'm pretty confident at this point that I can safely run 8 or more, and I'll verify exactly how many I can do this before I try to do anything crazy. But I could run 8 or more printers on the same 20 amp circuit with these printers printing these materials with the jobs that I do. So with that, I feel like I've got enough power in this room to scale quite a ways. So I think I'm pretty much set with power. Another thing to think about when you're talking about power is a UPS. That's an uninterruptible power supply. And if you've watched other people's print farm videos, you'll see a lot of them have their printers connected to a UPS. I don't. And I don't think it makes sense for me, at least, to do so, and maybe not for you. In my case, I'll kind of walk you through why I don't think it makes sense. The primary benefit is it's going to save the equipment or the filament that would be ruined by a power outage. Now, in my case, surge suppression is a good thing. I definitely would recommend having surge suppressors to protect the equipment, but they're a lot less expensive than a UPS. In my case, the house is on a whole home surge suppression system, so I don't have to worry about that on a per machine basis. So that's one thing that can scale a little bit better from a cost perspective. So that's one thing. The other is the price of the filament that might get wasted during a power outage. Now, I live in a rural area where I have quite a few power problems throughout the year, and I've had a number of them so far since I've started printing. And I would have to ruin a lot of prints and a lot of filament in order to add up to the cost of a UPS. A UPS that a couple of these printers might plug into is going to cost about $180, $190, and it takes a lot of filament ruined by bad prints and power outages to cover the cost of that UPS. So I don't think that's going to happen within the life of the battery of the UPS, so I'm just not going down that path. Now, to make that even more advantageous not to buy a UPS, these bamboo printers, both the X1 Carbons and the P1Ss, they have the ability to auto recover after a power outage. So if they have a power outage, even a blip, they'll come right back up and say, hey, we just failed, press print to continue, and they'll pick up right where they left off. Now that doesn't work great if they've been down so long, the bed's cooled and the parts come loose from the bed. And but for short outages where it's just a blip, it works about 50% of the time. And most of my power outages are short power outages where the auto recovery feature has a chance to be successful there. So with that reducing my cost of failed prints by about 50%, it's even less incentive to go buy a UPS. Now, finally, there's a couple other little things to think about when you're running a print farm and related to a UPS. Now, power is a big one, and obviously the UPS is part of that. Those UPSs are not 100% efficient, so they're going to actually draw more power than the printers would draw on their own. and they're going to produce some heat as a result of being not 100% efficient. So if heat is a concern for you in your room, then the UPS is going to produce some additional heat. It's probably not a tremendous amount, but it is some, and it's something you're going to have to deal with. And that extra power draw could be something you need to think about when you're planning out your electrical. Now, for example, if you were to put a big UPS or a number of UPSs on a single circuit to support multiple printers, and you lost power for an extended period of time, those batteries drained, when they came back up, they'd all start to charge. That alone could draw more current than what the printers were trying to draw and blow the breaker, unless you've got everything perfectly sized such that that can't happen, in which case you might not actually be able to support the printers during a power failure in the first place. There's a very careful balance there that you need to pay attention to, and in my case, it just doesn't make sense, right? Cost-wise, power-wise, heat's not really a problem for me, but I'd rather spend the money I could have spent on a UPS on something else. It's not worth it for me to recommend it to you when it's not something I believe in. I'm still managing my printers manually. So I send each job to each printer one by one through OrcaSlicer. So OrcaSlicer supports multiple printers, so it's not that bad, but it is something that could become a problem as I scale to more and more printers if I'm fortunate enough to have that happen. Now, I do keep things pre-sliced and organized in a very tight file structure, so it's easy for me to find things. They're already set up. I'm printing exactly the same thing over and over. I don't preload my plates onto the SD cards in the printers because I want to issue these things remotely. And a lot of times I'm out in the shop when I want to send a print. I'm sitting in the office. I'm sitting on the couch. Even once in a while, I'm even sitting right here down the print farm when I send those jobs. I don't want to have to be here and touch the printers in order to do that. So I'd rather just send them remotely and keep them stored on my laptop in the cloud, wherever I want to keep those things organized. Now, if I do get to the point where I need to move into some more automated functionality for managing these printers, there's a really cool piece of software out there called AutoFarm 3D. And I looked at this and evaluated it, and I'm just not quite ready to go down that path, but it's a really cool thing for the future that I'm going to keep my eye on. A couple things I'll highlight that it'll do for me is it will automatically dispatch jobs to the printers based on the capabilities of the printer and the requirement of the job. So if I need PLA, or I need PETG, or I need PETG-CF, or I need 2 types of filament, it figures all that out for me and just sends the job to the printer on its own. It can actually stagger the start times of those jobs so that they don't all spike in their power utilization at the same time. So if you're really trying to get to where you're pushing the limit on your power utilization on a single circuit or on multiple circuits, you can stagger the starts so that the warm up of the plate or the hot end doesn't all happen at the same time across many printers at once. So that's another cool capability. It's also got its own AI capability that will eventually, they're planning anyway, use the bamboo cameras. So their capability detects not only spaghetti detection, but also detaches. So as soon as the part detaches from the plate, and it will eventually cause a more ugly failure, it will detect that right away. That's awesome. And that adds an AI failure detection capability to the P1Ss that don't have that by default. It's probably even better than the capability that the X1 carbons have built into them. So that's another reason why that could be a great thing. That might even save you enough filament to pay for the capability of AutoFarm 3D. Another really cool thing that it'll do is it'll integrate in the future with Shopify and maybe some other e-commerce stores. So as you take orders, you could immediately start printing those jobs to replace that inventory, or if you're printing to order, you could print those jobs immediately when those orders come in without having manual intervention. That's awesome. And finally, one of the coolest things that it can do is it can automatically clear the bed for you. So clear the parts from the bed. It'll essentially use the print head to push the parts after they've cooled off the bed and into a container in front of the printer. Now, these printers are all enclosed, and you might say, hey, that's a problem because they're just going to push it right into the glass. But what people are doing is they're putting essentially hoods in place of the door that are open at the bottom, and then they push the parts off the front and they kind of fall out a chute because the bottom part's open. And that doesn't really affect the heat containment so much because heat rises. So when these chutes are open at the bottom, the heat's not trying to flow down and out. It's trying to stay up in the upper portion of the enclosure. So really cool capability. I'm looking forward to maybe getting to the point where I could justify something like that. I'm just not there quite yet. One more thing to think about when you're putting together a print farm is just the workflow. And in my case, I have a bunch of printers around the perimeter of the room, and I have a table, just a cheap fold-up table right in the middle of the room. I put all my tools on one side and a bin on the other. When I get done pulling prints off, wherever I'm at, I'm standing right next to the table no matter where I'm standing here. I just put the parts on the middle of the table, and then I'll stand here and pull the supports off and throw the trash in the trash, put the parts when they're done in the bin. And that's a really convenient workflow where one table and one set of tools really services up to 48 printers if I fully loaded all 3 levels in this front 60%. So I think that's a really important thing to think about, is just like the ergonomics, the workflow of how you're gonna make that work. Are you gonna need multiple trash cans, multiple sets of tools? Is it gonna be difficult to access everything? In this case, I feel like it's pretty well optimized and a nice perimeter-oriented design. Well, that pretty much does it for this video. If you made it this far, thank you very much for watching. I very much appreciate it. I'm going to follow this video up with a couple other videos. One of those will be a full woodshop tour, and one will be a day in the life where we start down here in the print farm, take things off the printers, get some more jobs started, and then get back out to the shop, work through all the assembly processes, fulfillment, and actually deliver things off to the post office. So stay tuned. Thanks again.